What a reception.
My goodness, yes.
There are 2,200. I was getting very nervous, Secretary Rice, when I heard the fire marshal has ordered us, but only if you don't have a seat. So thank you for getting here earlier. Are we honored at Baylor University to welcome Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice? Are we? As of 5 o'clock this afternoon, the New York Times announced this is on the bestseller list. That makes us very happy because the Baylor bookstore reports that they already have either sold or have orders for over 1,000 books here at Baylor University. That doesn't include any other vendor. That's another round of applause for this great book. Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you.
Believe me, I've written a book. It's hard to make the New York Times bestseller list. So that is wonderful. It all began in segregated Birmingham, Alabama. This great life journey into public service, through the academy, music, an important part. Almost every American knows the Condoleezza Rice story. Daughter of a Presbyterian minister and a church musician, and had this great, and still does, love for music and a serious vocational interest in music. You know, she has played with Yo-Yo Ma. Pretty serious. So a person of many talents. She also will likely be either commissioner of baseball or NFL commissioner. Or both. Share with us that journey, the professional journey, from segregated Birmingham to public service in a very profound way.
Well, thank you very much. But first I have to say thanks to you. Judge Starr and I have known each other for a very long time, and you have a wonderful president, and I've just met your wonderful provost, and I just want to congratulate you on the leadership of this great university. I want to say thanks for this warm welcome, and go Bears. Now, back to Birmingham. I was indeed born in segregated Birmingham, Alabama, probably the most segregated big city in America. I have written a book about my parents, an earlier book called Extraordinary Ordinary People, because my parents were in many ways ordinary people. My dad was a minister and high school guidance counselor, also a football coach when I was born. My mom was a school teacher, and it was a little unusual because one of her first students was actually Willie Mays. She taught him English. And he said, when I asked him if he remembered my mom, he said, "Oh, yes, I remember Miss Ray." That was her maiden name. He said, "She used to say, 'Son, you're going to be a ball player. So if you need a little time out of class, you go right ahead and take it.'" Now, that doesn't sound like my mother, but nonetheless, that was one of her first students, Willie Mays. And so my parents were in many ways ordinary, but they were extraordinary in the way that they raised me. We were a family of faith. We believed deeply in God. So the church was very much the center of our lives. We believed in country, even though it was a country that in some ways in segregated Alabama rejected us as black people. But more than anything, faith and family came together in education in my family, because my folks always had me to believe that you might not be able to control your circumstances, but you can control your response to your circumstances. And your armor in dealing with prejudice and segregation was education. Now, we came by it naturally because our family had been educated for a couple of generations, and I just have to take a brief moment to tell you about one of the heroes of our family, who was my grandfather on my father's side, John Wesley Rice Sr. Now, he was a sharecropper's son in Utah. That would be E-U-T-A-W. I'm not kidding, Alabama. And when he was a young man, he decided he was going to get book learning in a college. So he asked how a colored man could go to college. They told him about Little Stillman College, a Presbyterian school, about 30 miles away. So he saved up his cotton. He went off to Stillman, went through 1 year. Second year, they say, so how are you going to pay for your second year? He says he's out of cotton. They say he's out of luck. But he says, how are those boys going to college? They say, well, you see what they have is called a scholarship. And if you wanted to be a Presbyterian minister, then you could have a scholarship too. And my granddaddy said, that is exactly what I had in mind. And my family has been college educated and Presbyterian ever since. So this was a family that valued education, the transforming power of education. And in the segregated South, it was a way to say to a young kid like me, look, you may not be able to have a hamburger at the Woolworth's lunch counter, but if you work hard, if you're twice as good, you can be president of the United States if you want to be. And I became Secretary of State instead. So I owe it all to my parents.
Oh, how about that? Beautiful. And by the way, at Baylor, do we believe in scholarships? Yes, we do. Yes, we do. 9/11. 9/11 changed our history.
Yes.
The new century was ushered in. The age of terrorism was already before us, but it brought it home in an immediate and unprecedented way.
Right.
And on 9/11, according to your wonderful description and poignant description, you had two presidential conversations with presidents.
That's right.
President Bush, I think you may have even been giving orders to President Bush, and
bit,
then
yes.
a president with whom you could converse in Russian,
Right.
Vladimir Putin.
Yes.
Tell us about those two conversations on 9/11.
Well, of course, when 9/11 happened and my assistant said that a plane had flown into the World Trade Center, I thought it had been an accident. And then a second plane, and I realized it had been a terrorist attack. And I was trying to reach Don Rumsfeld on the phone, and I looked behind me on TV and a plane had hit the Pentagon. And at that point, the Secret Service said, you have to get to the bunker. Planes are flying into buildings all over Washington. Now, the strange thing is that the president was at a 4-hour, we thought, event in Florida. You remember he was at an education event. And so neither the deputy, Steve Hadley, for National Security Affairs, nor I went with him. It was just going to be a brief trip. On that fateful day, he did not have his national security team with him. So as I'm rushed off to the bunker by the Secret Service, I stopped to make 2 calls. I called my aunt and uncle. You have to know the Rices and Rays. They would have found their way to Washington, D.C. if they hadn't heard from me. So I thought I'd better call them first. So I called them. I said, I'm all right. Tell everybody I'm all right. And then I talked to the president, who said, I'm coming back. And I did something I'd never done before, and I never did again. I raised my voice to the President of the United States, and I said, stay where you are. It's not safe for you to come back here. We're under attack. I then made it down to the bunker, and my kind of Cold War, nuclear war training, because I was a specialist in Soviet military affairs in the early stages of my career, and I knew that we worried about something called a spiral of alerts. If our military increased its readiness level, the Russians would see it, and they would increase theirs, and pretty soon you could get into a dangerous standoff, and so I thought I'd better call the Russians. So I talked to President Putin, and I explained to him that we were raising our alert levels. He said, I know. He said, we're bringing our alert levels down. We're canceling our exercises. Is there anything else we can do? And I thought, the Cold War really is over.
Very powerful. You said, and you wrote this at page 79 of the book, that every day since has been September 12th.
That's right. Every day since.
We sustained the attacks.
Yes.
And you drove with the president on that day to the Pentagon. You say you began working 17-hour days. You were working hard before, but now remarkably hard. And then you write this, when I woke up the next morning, which was the morning of September 13, I turned on the TV. The scene was from London, and the Coldstream Guards were playing in the square outside Buckingham Palace. I realized that they were playing our national anthem. I broke down and cried.
Yes.
You'd had to control your emotions while the nation mourn, but you could let go that one time.
At one time, because in the immediate aftermath, all day on September 11th and on September 12th, we actually went to the Pentagon on September 12th, and I'll never forget driving up and seeing that smoldering hole in the building and the twisted metal, and rescue workers were still working there, and these people were dead tired from having pulled people from the rubble, some alive, some not. And when I got back in the car at my house, I thought, what is that smell? And it was actually the soot, the smell of the soot from the Pentagon. And so I went to bed that night. I got up the next morning. And you're right, we'd just been going and going and going. And seeing the British play our national anthem, I thought it's good to have friends. And that was the first time that I broke down. We went on September 15th to the national service at the National Cathedral, the day of mourning. And at the beginning of that service, it was like being in a funeral, as you might imagine. And I can remember going up Massachusetts Avenue, and the Russian Orthodox Church was tolling bells. And I saw one man standing on the side, and he had a sign that said, "God bless America, we will not be terrorized." And it gave me a certain strength that this ordinary American felt that way. And so at the service, I can remember a moment when it turned, and it turned when the Combined Armed Forces choirs sang the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Because for years, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, a Civil War hymn, had a phrase, "As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free." And in our politically correct world, people had begun singing, "As he died to make men holy, let us live to make men free." And in honoring the dead, the chorus sang the original words. And all of a sudden, I felt myself a sense of defiance. We were done with the mourning. It was time to protect the country.
Tell us about those first steps to protect the country.
Well, you might imagine, we had not had an attack on the homeland, civilians on the homeland of the United States since the War of 1812. And so we really didn't have any structures that dealt with internal security. And I remember going into a room you've been in many times, Ken, into the cabinet room at the White House. And all of a sudden, it wasn't just the Secretary of State and Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It was the Secretary of Transportation. It was the Secretary of Energy. It was the Secretary, all these people. And there were 50-some people in this room. And it was chaos. And I thought, I'm the National Security Advisor. I'm supposed to make sense of this for the president. But we had no earthly way to make sense of it. We didn't really have those structures. And so we had to improvise. We were in a different kind of war, and we knew it. We had to figure out how to turn law enforcement, where we treated terrorists like criminals on, say, Law and Order, where you preserved the evidence and so forth, to understanding that the most important thing that a captured terrorist can do for you is to tell you about the next plot. And so we had to change our thinking about how we were going to deal with terrorists. We had to change our thinking about protecting the country, so we created the Department of Homeland Security. But I'll tell you something. I'm very grateful, and we were very fortunate that there was not another attack on the territory of the United States, and there still has not been a successful attack. It's not because the terrorists don't try. Every day they plot and they plan, and they try. But it's because of the vigilance of our intelligence agencies, our Homeland Security people, and especially because we have men and women in uniform who volunteer. They volunteer to defend us at the front lines of freedom, and we owe them our eternal gratitude.
Afghanistan. The Taliban fell quickly, and you wrote this in connection then with the rebuilding of that war-torn country. After 9/11, this is at page 109, after 9/11, it was very clear that weak and failing states constituted a grave security threat to the United States. They could not control their borders and risked becoming safe havens for terrorists. And so a new model was developed, and you were at the vortex of developing that new model, not simply of military action, but civilian action. Describe that.
Well, imagine this. You're the national security advisor for the most powerful country in the world, and you've just watched an attack that brought down the Twin Towers, attacked the Pentagon, the passengers of the flight in Pennsylvania had been driven to the ground. And you realize it's been done by a group of stateless terrorists operating out of a failed state called Afghanistan, the 5th poorest country in the world. And it's probably cost them $300,000 or so to launch the attack. And so your concept of physical security changes. And you recognize that actually the most grave threat to us is not from powerful marching armies any longer. It's from ungoverned spaces like Afghanistan or Somalia or the northwest frontier between Pakistan and Afghanistan, where terrorists can breed and hide. But the worst circumstances are that they're either supported by state sponsors, in which case you have to hold the state sponsor accountable, as we did the Taliban in Afghanistan, or the population, because they're afraid of them, will just tolerate them. And because terrorists don't wear uniforms and they use civilians as human shields, you essentially have to somehow win the population to your side. And that's the essence of what we call a counterinsurgency strategy. Yes, you have to fight the terrorist, but you also have to make life better for the people there so that they are on your side, not at least, if not on the side of the terrorist, tolerating the terrorist. And so that was the new model that was born, that you had to bring at night, perhaps, security to a village, and then you had to, the next day, perhaps helping them with governance, and that afternoon you're digging little wells to help their lives be somewhat better. And that's what we finally really kind of learned to do, the military and civilians working together. In fact, at the State Department with the Defense Department, we created something called provincial reconstruction teams, where under a brigade commander, you would have diplomats and reconstruction workers right there integrated with the military in these villages, trying to help people be not just secure, but have better lives as well.
You talk about, and you mention Pakistan, and especially the Northwest Frontier province of Pakistan. Terrorists have been either killed or apprehended there. And notwithstanding the administration's Herculean efforts, this has nothing to do with partisan politics, this is national security. It was so difficult to find, to capture, to apprehend. So every few years, it would seem, another would be apprehended. Of course, 10 years, Osama bin Laden is brought to justice. Yes. Why does it take so long?
Well, it takes a long time because terrorists are actually pretty good at hiding, as it turns out. And if you look at that territory between Pakistan and Afghanistan, you know why. It's not so hard to hide there. But I've been asked many times, was I surprised that we got Osama bin Laden? I was not. We actually learned of the courier who ultimately led us to Osama bin Laden. We learned of him in 2007. And I remember we were very exciting when the then CIA director, Mike Hayden, said they found this courier, he could lead us to Osama bin Laden, and then the trail went cold. But eventually that was the trail that was picked up again. So no, I was not surprised that we found him. Was I surprised where we found him? Sort of on the outskirts of a major city in Pakistan? Yes, I was surprised. And it speaks volumes to the deeply rooted extremism in Pakistan and even in some of Pakistan's security forces. And Pakistan's not a very stable place. It's a place that's riven with extremism, and it is a very dangerous place for the Pakistanis, first of all, for the Afghans, and in fact for us.
And let me add India to the equation,
Yes.
because one of the very illuminating things about your wonderful book is the connection between Al-Qaeda and other extremist or terrorist organizations, including then the terrorist attacks on India. And you write this: the terrorists who had committed the attacks against India, this is in late 2001, had clear links to Al-Qaeda through the web of relationships with extremist groups that Pakistan maintained in the region.
Yes.
This is an extraordinarily difficult thing to understand, isn't it? Even for intelligence agencies and with all of the resources we have, it's difficult to intrude into these webs and to break them up.
It's extremely difficult because obviously one of the problems is that the Pashtun in Afghanistan and the Pashtun in Pakistan are cousins. And so sometimes you will see one cousin fighting for the Taliban, and on the other side there may be Pakistan security. And it's a really tightly interwoven set of relationships that makes it very hard to root it out. The Pakistanis really need to get a handle on these extremists. Their forces, their military forces, are still configured to fight India in Kashmir. And we have spent billions of dollars trying to get them to understand they need to fight terrorists in the northwest frontier. Now, the Indians really don't particularly want any part of fighting the Pakistanis in Kashmir anymore. The Indians want Bangalore and Bollywood and a seat on the Security Council. But there are some in Pakistan for whom there's a kind of existential, almost talisman against decline to be in conflict with India. And so getting the Pakistanis to focus on what their real problem is, after all, it's the extremists who killed Benazir Bhutto. It's a threat to Pakistan as much as it's a threat to us.
Moving to the Middle East, you spend a lot of time,
Yes.
and brilliantly so, just in reflecting on the Middle East, the various peace initiatives. One of the intriguing things in your book, this is at page 131, the president, who hails from Texas, and has a ranch not far from here.
And there's a ranch, which is why I spent a lot of time in Waco for the last 8 years.
And by the way, welcome back to Waco. Are we happy she's back in Waco? You're right that the president found the language process very frustrating. And a few days after he became president, he had challenged me when I gave him a carefully worded statement to deliver to the press on the South Lawn prior to boarding Marine One. The president, why do I have to say it this way?
Yes.
Secretary Rice, the National Security Advisor. We didn't have time for a long historical discussion, so I just said, Mr. President, if you change one comma, you will have changed United States policy in the Middle East. Make sure you write those English papers with great care. And then, the end of this very charming story, the president relented and read the statement as written.
Yes. Well, it's really important to have a relationship of trust with the president if you're going to be his national security advisor, because sometimes you have to say things and tell him things that he doesn't particularly want to hear. And I was with then Governor Bush from the end of 1998 when he started really thinking about running for the presidency, early in 99. You know, we schlepped our own baggage in the early stages of the campaign. We went to rallies that sometimes were kind of small. And you watch the growth of this campaign until ultimately he's president of the United States. But he used to tell world leaders, he'd say, oh, Condi, she's like my sister. He said, you know, we came here together. It really made a difference because you want people around you who will tell you exactly what they're thinking. We never did it in public. I certainly never did it in a way that was going to appear in the New York Times. But we could talk with each other about anything. And it's important if you're president because the Oval Office has an incredible impact on people. Oh, Mr. President, you're so smart. Oh, Mr. President, aren't you looking fine today? Oh, Mr. President. And if the president's not careful, he'll just get yes people around him. And so I think having people that you trust and that have been with you a long time is especially important when you're going to sit in that chair.
There's a really terrific story relating to the Middle East about Crown Prince Abdullah coming to Crawford, and things are not going well.
Yeah.
The conversation about the Palestinians, Israel, borders, settlements, the whole constellation of issues. And the Crown Prince is thinking about, can you imagine, leaving Central Texas? And leaving in a huff.
Yes.
And so you write, he was threatening to leave, which would have been a huge diplomatic setback. And here are actually your words. The president asked the Saudi leader to go for a tour of the ranch and to talk about religion.
That's right.
Calm things down a little bit. Talk about
Yeah, exactly. You know, that was a natural leap of thinking, right? Let's talk about religion with the Saudi crown prince.
Yeah. Politics hasn't worked. Let's talk about religion. The atmosphere, this is again Secretary Rice, the atmosphere improved while they were riding together in the president's pickup truck. Get ready. He and the Saudi prince encountered a wild turkey that Abdullah took as a sign from God and a bond of friendship between the two men. When the president, you see why you got to buy this book and give it at Christmas? When the president related the incident that evening at dinner, I thought, whatever works. What could work in the Middle East?
Well, in the Middle East, they have tried, everyone has tried, to get a two-state solution, because I think everyone understands that there needs to be a state for the Palestinians, needs to be a state for Israel. And it's the unluckiest process in the world in many ways. We were actually pretty close in 2008. Ehud Olmert had put a very good deal on the table. But Ehud Olmert by that time was in deep political trouble, deep legal trouble in Israel, and the Palestinian leader didn't take him up on it. We even tried to get President Abbas to just, it's a diplomatic term, deposit his agreement with the proposal that Olmert made with President Bush, who could then leave it for President Obama, who could then pick it up and go from there. But for a lot of reasons, Abbas was not interested. And I said to President Abbas, who I admired a lot, I said, you know what? I said, you should have taken the deal in 1948. You should have taken the deal in 1967. You should have taken it in 2000. You should have taken it in 2008. Pretty soon, if you don't take a deal, your state is going to be the size of the White House, because the Israelis keep creating facts on the ground. But it isn't going to work to tell them to freeze settlements. You've got to decide what's in Israel, what's in Palestine, get the two states, and move on. Unfortunately, now the Palestinians have gone on a gambit which I think is very ill-advised, which is trying to get acceptance through the UN of a Palestinian state, when really they need to sit down and negotiate it with the Israelis. This is going to go nowhere.
China. You were just in China. And China was very relevant throughout your service in both your capacities. And at page 709, you also write about the relationship with China and North Korea, yes, and North Korea's nuclear ambitions. And you say this: there's little doubt in my mind that the Chinese were helping us put pressure on the North Korean regime at that time. Of all nations, China has the most influence on North Korea, but the Chinese cannot dictate to the North, and sometimes it is wearisome to watch Beijing's own frustration with Kim Jong-il. So not even the Chinese are all-powerful, even in their own region.
No, the North Koreans are a singular experience in international politics. You know, they have a title for them, the Hermit Kingdom, and they absolutely deserve it.
Sounds like a movie.
Just like a movie. I remember someone saying at a National Security Council meeting once, we have to get the North Koreans to tell the truth. And I thought, these people tell their people that South Korea is a prison camp and North Korea is paradise. They are not acquainted with the truth. And so it's a little hard when you're dealing with leaders that live inside their own heads that way to get very much done. And sometimes the Chinese are just as frustrated. But for the Chinese, the problem is they really fear a nuclear North Korea because they worry that Japan might go nuclear or so forth. But they fear even more the collapse of the North Korean regime. And so getting them to put enough pressure on the North Koreans to actually stop their nuclear program is not an easy task.
Iraq. The president has made his announcement about the drawdown and withdrawal of all troops by the end of the year. Reflections on the war itself, and then going forward.
Well, Iraq is, we went into Iraq not to bring democracy to Iraq. That is a kind of erroneous impression out there. We went to Iraq because we believed there was a serious security threat from Saddam Hussein. This was, after all, a person who had dragged the region into war 3 times. President Clinton had actually used force against them in 1998. He tried to assassinate George H.W. Bush. He'd used chemical weapons against his own people and against the Iranians. He was shooting at our aircraft practically every day. I remember President Bush turning to Don Rumsfeld and saying, what if he gets a lucky shot and brings down an American pilot? What are we going to do then? And we had intelligence reporting that, by the way, he put 400,000 of his own people in mass graves. And we had reporting that he was indeed had reconstituted his biological and chemical weapons and would reconstitute his nuclear weapons in a relatively short period of time, as little as a year, maybe by the end of the decade. It was a threat we couldn't let stand, and in the shadow of 9/11, where we'd let a threat materialize and it had come back to haunt us. Now, the weapons of mass destruction that reporting turned out not to be right. But I will tell you that I'm very grateful that Saddam Hussein is gone, that the Iraqis have a chance to build a decent democratic society there. They're stumbling forward, but young democracies always do. And I'm really glad, in light of what we read this morning in the newspapers about the Iranians and their progress on a nuclear program, that we're not sitting here talking about a nuclear arms race between Saddam Hussein's Iraq and Ahmadinejad's Iran. And I think that's where we would be. So we did the right thing in taking down Saddam Hussein. Now, we would have hoped, I would have hoped, that we could keep a residual force in Iraq to help the Iraqis train their security forces, to help them with counterterrorism activities, and as a kind of counterweight to the Iranians, who are a meddlesome neighbor. We were able to get immunity clauses to protect American soldiers that were acceptable to us and to the Iraqis. I don't know what happened in the negotiations. But now that we have decided we're going to pull all of our forces out, I hope we double down on diplomatic support for the Iraqis. The Iraqis are about to become our 9th largest purchaser of military equipment in the world and the 4th in the region. That will give us a chance, through military training exchanges and the like, to have a close military relationship with the Iraqis. Because an Iraq that is a friend of the United States and that won't invade its neighbors and that won't seek weapons of mass destruction is going to be at the center of a very different kind of Middle East. And so I, more than anybody, mourn and regret the loss of life, the sacrifices that we encountered in Iraq. But I think in the long run, it will turn out to be a decision that leads to a much better Middle East.
Reflect, if you would, on the coalition of the willing, and in particular, the special relationship between the mother country, the UK, and the United States. And you write about Tony Blair. Before I quote, crises can reveal who your friends really are, can't they?
Yes, yes.
And you recount that even though his government seemed to be in danger of falling, Prime Minister Blair was quite brave and rose to the occasion, and you said this: the president was concerned that the war in Iraq might bring down Blair's government, and he made it clear that he would think no less of the prime minister if Britain did not participate in the invasion. And yet Britain stood by.
Because Tony Blair said, I said I would be there with you. And I said, you know, the Brits are something. We were so close to the Brits, and American presidents generally have been. I once had to remind a speechwriter who had written a line, Britain, America's first ally, that would be France, not Britain.
That would be Britain.
That our first war had actually been against Britain. So that's kind of the nature of the relationship. It's not that we always agree with the Brits, but if you don't have the Brits with you, you really feel alone. And Tony Blair, international rock star, and also a tremendous person of values and principles. I don't know if people know how deeply religious Tony Blair is. And I think somebody who has a kind of grounding that you don't find in all that many leaders. And so we were very fortunate to have him as a partner throughout this entire period.
Let's move to Africa. The president not only had a great heart for Mexico and Latin America, less time to spend on those issues than he had intended and prepared. That first foreign trip was to Mexico.
Yes.
And you write this in a speech in Senegal. President Bush put it this way: the stolen sons and daughters of Africa helped to awaken the conscience of America.
Yes.
And then the Millennium Challenge account was launched. Bono comes on stage,
Yes.
becomes a partner in the effort. The Global Fight, the Global Fund to fight HIV/AIDS. And you write this is at page 229. The president began a speech by saying that the United States had been blessed with plenty. He went on to quote the Gospel of Luke, saying, "Everyone to whom much is given, much will be required." And you write this is Secretary Rice: these initiatives will be remembered as one of the greatest acts of compassion by any country
Yes.
in history.
Yes.
Reflections on the initiatives in Africa.
Yes, the initiatives in Africa. Africa, is the continent where people always say there's great potential. And I think President Bush not only believed that there was great potential, but that it was about time for it to be realized. And the AIDS pandemic, which when we came into office, the predictions were that another 10 million people would die during our term in office. And President Bush, a man of compassion, just couldn't fathom that. And so when we had a chance not to cure AIDS, because there's still no cure, but antiretrovirals had begun to extend life. And so we launched the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief to make antiretrovirals available to as much of the population in the hardest hit countries as possible. And it's one of those moments that I will always remember. I remember sitting in the Oval Office having the discussion about whether to do it. And of course, there were, the budget people were saying, $15 billion, that's a lot of money. And people were saying, well, will the Africans use the money well? And one of the things that the Millennium Challenge did was it really only gave money to countries that were fighting corruption and governing wisely and more democratic. But this AIDS relief was not going to be conditioned in that way. It was just going to go to the countries that were hardest hit. And we had the discussion, and a question came up. Well, if you can't cure the disease, is it worth it to extend life? And that was something I felt I could speak to, because my mother had cancer, breast cancer, when I was 15 years old. That was her first diagnosis. She lived 15 years longer, and she died when I was 30. And even though I miss her every day, I was so grateful to God that she saw me grow from 15 to 30. She saw me become a Stanford professor. She knew that I was launched, not her 15-year-old girl, her 30-year-old professional daughter. And so I spoke up, and I told that story, and I said, Mr. President, we may not be able to cure those moms, but they will live longer to see their children get older, and that will matter. And at the end of the discussion, Mike Gerson said, Mike Gerson, the president's speechwriter and confidant, said, if we can do this and we don't, history will treat us with shame. And that was the nature of that discussion in the Oval Office. It was a deeply philosophical, compassion discussion, not the facts and figures. And I'm very proud of what the president did in launching that program. And indeed, millions of people have been saved as a result. And I will never forget going to Uganda and hearing a group of AIDS orphans, the oldest one probably no more than 16 or 17, singing America the Beautiful.
Another story, Liberia.
Yeah.
Your Aunt Teresa had taught in Liberia
Yes.
in 1961. And Liberia had a very evil dictator,
Yes.
Charles Taylor.
Charles Taylor.
And our students have such a heart for Africa. This was an instance when military intervention worked very efficiently.
Yes.
Could you tell that story?
Yes, well, in brief, Charles Taylor, of course, had ravaged Liberia, a country that used to be at the forefront of progress in Africa. And I'll never forget the picture of a kid a little boy, he couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 years old. He had a teddy bear backpack on his back, and he had an AK-47 in his hand. And I thought to myself, this can't be. And so the Liberians wanted to get rid of Charles Taylor. We needed a little pressure. We used 100 Marines to secure the airport and the seaports so that he would leave. And today, Liberia is in a presidential election. It's tough going. But of course, the president of Liberia, Ellen Sirleaf Johnson, has just been given a well-deserved Nobel Prize for what she has done in trying to bring democracy to her people. And so Liberia is a good news story, and it's a good news story of what America can do when it partners with these people.
Special moments. You describe a remarkable funeral of one of the great men on the planet, John Paul. And you describe the sun bursting through the clouds suddenly, and you write this: perhaps only believers saw this powerful affirmation of the truth of the resurrection. And you had an exchange with Laura, the First Lady Bush. I was grateful to have been there. This is at page 353. Describe that almost miraculous scene.
Yes. Well, we were at the funeral for the Holy Father, and it had been a really kind of cold and gray day, and it was a high mass, so it was a 3-hour mass. And at the end of it, I walked to the front to get with the president and Laura. President Clinton was with us, President George H.W. Bush was with us, and we were all standing there. And as the funeral mass ended, the pallbearers lifted the coffin and started back up the stairs of St. Peter's Basilica. The bells were tolling from the basilica. The crowd, 1 million strong, was waving solidarity banners because, of course, Pope John Paul II was Polish and had consecrated the Soviet Union to God, and many believe helped to bring it down. And the choir was singing this ethereal music. And all of a sudden, the pallbearers turned the coffin toward the crowd, and the sun burst out. And I was speechless. And Laura said, "Did you see that?" And I said, "Yes." But I couldn't really speak. And as we walked back past the Pieta, I said to myself, thank God for the gift of eternal life, because it was the most powerful demonstration of the fact of the resurrection that I had ever seen. I asked many people after if the press had reported on this, and they said no, it had not been reported. But I was in Argentina a few weeks later, and the Argentine foreign minister, a Catholic, said to me, "Did you see that?" And I wondered, maybe it was something only believers saw. But it was really pretty powerful, pretty powerful.
Speaking of powerful, you had an enormous amount of influence, prestige, power as National Security Advisor. And then in the second term, you succeeded a great person, General Colin Powell. And so compare the two positions, one in the White House at the elbow, as it were, of the president, and the other, the Secretary of State, member of the cabinet, and a vast department.
Yes. Well, it's great being National Security Advisor. You see the president all the time. You're down the hall. You see him 6-7 times a day. But your staff, rarefied staff to be sure, but your staff. And you don't own troops like the Secretary of Defense. You don't own diplomats like the Secretary of State. I remember telling the president, being National Security Advisor is a little bit like doing foreign policy by remote control. Let me see if I can get Secretary A to do this and Secretary B to do that. And you're coordinating all the time. Well, finally, you're Secretary of State, and now somebody else has to coordinate you. And you have your own voice is really the important thing. You're no longer the honest broker trying to bring all of the views to the table. You are the Secretary of State. And just for a little bit of a history lesson, you know, the Secretary of State was the first position, cabinet position, created by the Founding Fathers. There were originally only 4. Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury was created second, Attorney General third, and then Secretary of War last. The Secretary of State is therefore the senior cabinet officer. And so it's a job taken together with the fact that you get to go out and represent this great country that I love so much and see what America can do. It is a tough job. The State Department is 57,000 people worldwide, so you're dealing with that every day. But I loved the authority that came with the responsibility of being Secretary of State. You are confirmed by the Senate, which means that you have obligations not just to the President, but to the Congress as well. And so it's a very different job, and I very much loved it. George Shultz once told me that being Secretary of State's the best job in government, he said. And I think he was right.
There are 2,200 people here in the audience, and each of you has submitted a question. Unfortunately, the Secretary has to leave on a jet plane and go to another commitment. But Provost Davis, are you here? Has some questions, some representative questions that come from you, the audience. Join me in welcoming again our Provost, Elizabeth Davis.
Dr. Rice, I'm worried you might not answer this first question, but it was so good. I'm hoping you'll try. How did you become so special, awesome, and famous?
Oh.
P.S. I am 8 years old.
Oh.
By Langston Wade. Langston, are you out there? If you are, there, can you stand up and wave? There.
Shall I answer?
Please,
Langston?
I would love for you to answer
Right.
that.
Well, thank you very much, Langston, for your question. And I'm just amazed at your vocabulary. My goodness. You have to find something that you love to do. And I am very fortunate that I found what I was passionate about, even though I thought what I was passionate about was I was going to be a concert pianist. And I had studied music from the age of 3. I could read music before I could read. And I went off in the summer of my sophomore year to the Aspen Music Festival school, where a lot of prodigies studied. And I met 13-year-olds who could play from sight everything it had taken me all year to learn. I was 17. And I thought, I'm about to end up teaching 13-year-olds to murder Beethoven, or maybe playing at Nordstrom, but I am not going to play Carnegie Hall. And so, Langston, I decided to look for another major. And I took a course in international politics. It was taught by a Soviet specialist, and I loved it. And that's how I got interested in international politics. And once I found what I'd love to do, my passion, I felt that I wanted to get good at it. And so I learned to speak Russian, and I worked very hard. And then I found people who helped me along the way. And everybody has to find people who help them along the way. We call them mentors. It might be your teacher, it might be your minister, it might be a community leader, maybe somebody at the Boys and Girls Clubs, but somebody who will take an interest in you. And I always was lucky to find people who took an interest in me. So that's why I'm blessed to be doing the things that I'm doing now, but it all started with finding something that I absolutely love to do. So to you college students out there, and I know Langston's going to be one pretty soon, I can already tell that. But to you college students out there, I'd just say one thing. When my students ask me, how do I become like you? In other words, how do I become Secretary of State? I say, you start as a failed piano major. Don't plan every step of your life. Life takes funny turns.
Wonderful. With all the revolutions that have occurred in the Middle East during the Arab Spring, what do you think the United States' role will be among the new governments of these countries?
Thank you. Well, the Arab Spring is one of the most extraordinary developments in the last several decades. We have to remember that authoritarianism just isn't stable. People ultimately will take their freedom if you don't give it to them. And now, because reform has come late in the Middle East, it's a very chaotic situation. Now, the fact is that these people have gotten their freedom. But freedom and democracy are not the same thing. Democracy is the institutionalization of freedom. And if you are going to have a situation in which the weak are not exploited by the strong, where you don't have a tyranny of the majority, where the rights of women are protected, where the rights of religious minorities are protected, we're going to have to help them get from freedom to democratic institutions. We're going to have to help them write constitutions. We're going to have to help them train civil society. And we are going to have to advocate for the proposition that freedom and democracy cannot be a license to overrun the rights of those who are minorities. And in that sense, religious minorities are particularly at risk. You've seen probably some of the things that have been happening to the Coptic Christians in Egypt. This is going to be a long haul, but ultimately I think we're better off without authoritarians there. And while it might be a little rocky, in the long run, I think it will ultimately be more stable.
It's encouraging.
You have, I guess, provided part of an answer to this question when you responded to Langston, but I wonder if you might add a little more for our college crowd out there. What choice or decision that you made in college had the greatest impact on your life and career?
Yeah. Well, clearly it was the decision to leave music, and you have to understand, I mean, I was bred to be a musician. Condoleezza comes from Condoleezza, which is a musical term for with sweetness. So my mother had a view. You know, I got my first piano when I was 3 months old, so it was clear where I was going. And indeed, when I was 10 years old, having played already for 7 years, I told my mother, I'm quitting. And she said, you're not old enough or good enough to make that decision. And so I continued to play. She was not into modern parenting, obviously. So when I made the decision to leave music, it was really a huge decision. And I felt for the time that I was sort of searching for a major that I was a failure. I can remember going back to college, and in the first quarter, when I was back in college, I thought, okay, English literature, that's what I'll study. With all due respect to English literature, I hated it. Then I was going to do the second quarter, state and local government. That sounded practical. My project was to interview the city water manager in Denver, the single most boring man that I have ever met to this day. And I thought, that's not it either. Then, as I said, I took that course in international politics, and that was it. So to the students, I would say, if you've not yet found what you're passionate about, keep looking, number one. Secondly, if you're looking for it, you may feel that you're not ever going to find it, but it may find you, as international politics found me. Third, when you finally find it, go for it. And don't be deterred by those who might say, you want to study what? Because the idea that a black woman from Birmingham, Alabama ought to be a Soviet specialist is pretty far-fetched, right? Just because you look a particular way or you of a particular gender, don't let anybody define your passion for you on that basis. And the final point I made to Langston, find somebody who's interested in your career. And we have a strange idea that your role model has to look like you. Now, if I had been waiting for a black woman Soviet specialist role model, I'd still be waiting. My role models and actually my mentors were white men, in fact, old white men, because those were the people who were in my field. And so just find somebody who is interested in you. It doesn't matter what they look like.
Okay, our last question this evening has two parts, and I'll read them both. What further steps do you think need to happen in order to continue to narrow the gender gap in politics, and would you consider running for president?
Well, thank you, but no. Look, I'll take the second part first, and then I want to return to the question of gender and race. Look, I think you have to know who you are and what you want to do and I'm a policy person. I love the pursuit of answers to complex problems. I like politics, but I don't love it. And you'd better love politics if you're going to run for office. I was in a campaign, as I said, up close and personal. And at the end of a 5-event day, George W. Bush was raring to go, and I was raring to go to bed. And I could always, therefore, tell who really liked politics and who didn't. And so I don't see myself in politics. I do see myself continuously in public service. And I named this book No Higher Honor because that's how I feel about public service. And I want to encourage, particularly the young folks here, find a way to do public service. Either go into government at some point. I know there's a lot of, I know there's a lot out there now about how hard it is and your personal life is exposed and so forth, but it's well worth doing. And a democracy cannot survive without citizens who are prepared to serve it. Secondly, I am very proud, actually, of this generation because I'm finding our students more public-minded, going into Teach for America, going into the Peace Corps, serving in missions abroad through their churches, going into the military. That public-mindedness is a very good thing because I fear that what's happening to us as a country and a society is that we are actually turning our back on something that has been at the core of what has made Americans special and different. Our great national myth, and I don't mean something that's untrue, just that something a little bit outsized, is it doesn't matter where you came from, it matters where you're going. You can come from humble circumstances and you can do great things. And that has brought people here for generations from around the world, and it has sustained people moving seamlessly between classes. We've never had rigid class structures. And it's always kept us from aggrievement, why don't I have, and from its twin brother, entitlement, why don't they give me? Now, once you give in to aggrievement and entitlement, you've lost control of your future because your future is in the hands of somebody else. And that leads me then to the question about women and the gender gap. It is closing. We have now had 3 out of the last 4 secretaries of state have been female. It won't be long before we have a female president because we take our presidents from basically governors and senators, and as you see women filling those ranks, somebody will eventually emerge. There's a reason that it was Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin, a governor and a senator. It's just the way we elect our presidents. But what we can't do, either as women or minorities, is to give in to what my family would have called victimhood, even in the most stressing circumstances of segregated Birmingham, Alabama. When you are a young woman, you need to be confident that you are very good at what you're doing, and that means you might have to be twice as good. Well, so be it. It also means that you need to find those mentors who will help you navigate the shoals of gender politics, because particularly if you're in an all-male-dominated area, yeah, there'll be a few slings and arrows here, and you have to learn how to deal with that. And so with younger women, I believe that mentorship is extremely important. But by the time you're Secretary of State, if you let somebody treat you badly because you're a woman, it's your fault, not theirs. You've got plenty of arsenal to deal with it. And so I'm confident that this country is going to continue to see the rise of women, continue to see the rise of minorities. The great thing about the American experiment is that it actually wasn't, despite its great words, very equal to start with. My ancestors were 3/5 of a man in the Constitution. But impatient patriots and lots of hard work we have become a place that is truer and truer to what we say we believe. And I think that is why it was really no higher honor than to be the Secretary of State for this very, very special country called America.
Ladies and gentlemen, no higher honor. It's informative.
Thank you, sisters. Alpha pies. My sister's here. I'm an alpha pie.
Absolutely wonderful.